Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Ram Chat. I'm Mike Ongstead. I'll be hosting today, and I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Sondra Cosgrove.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Dr. Cosgrove, for those who don't know, she is a professor at the College of Southern Nevada and also the executive director of Vote Nevada, which is a civic education organization in the state. So we're so glad.
And now I get to teach you how to say Nevada correctly.
Oh, no.
It's Nevada. It's like Nevada. A New Jersey A, Nevada. So it's the Sierra Nevadas, but we live in Nevada.
All right, Nevada.
Just FYI, it's a thing.
I was even warned beforehand how to pronounce it, and I still got it wrong.
But usually when I say it's that New Jersey act, Nevada, people get it then.
Good. All right. Good to know. Good to know. Nevada listeners, make sure you get it right. Well, Dr. Cosgrove, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And for today, call me Sondra. We're chatting.
Sondra? Great. Well, Sondra, I just want to give you a chance, open up the door to you to just kind of give our audience the elevator pitch for Vote Nevada and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I'm a history professor at a community college. So a lot of my students are folks that didn't think they'd ever go to college. It wasn't in their plans. You know, they had all kinds of other things they were going to do. And now they've got an opportunity or something's come up and they're coming into college. And so I have to kind of teach them how to be college students. But the thing I also get from them once we have a rapport is then they start saying, where am I supposed to go to do this thing? And how am I supposed to get a business license? And who does this? Because I don't know who to talk to. And it really started dawning on me how privileged I was that I have a basic understanding, a civics understanding of how government works. So I know who to call, who to talk to, where to start. To them, they might as well not be literate at all, not know how to read because they have no idea where to go to. So I created Vote Nevada to do what I do in the classroom out in the public. So Mike, say you want to start a small business because everybody's doing that right now. Who in the heck does small business licenses in Nevada? Well, it's the Secretary of State's office. But then you say to me, wait a minute, doesn't she also do elections? I'm like, yes, she has two roles. So let me show you where you start out to go get your business license. And to me, that's super important for people to be civically literate.
Absolutely. That's great. It's, it's fascinating. We do mostly politics. And I know you're nonpartisan or not politically campaigning, active in political campaigns and things. But it's interesting to see kind of how we talk about civics and civic education, both on a political sense, upway through elections and who votes. But it does go all the way down to your point to how do I interact with my local government? What do I do if I need, to your point, a business license? So it's fascinating. Do you find? I mean, do you field a lot of kind of larger political issues in the state with people? Do you help them navigate that, or is it mostly kind of state government or local government interactions?
It depends on what's going on. So, like for instance, this Saturday we had a bunch of laws in our last legislative session that are going to impact the way we manage our primary process. And so I'm running a Zoom meeting on Saturday. I'm basically advertising. I know you've heard about these laws. We're going to do mail-in voting. There's a bunch of stuff that's going to change. Log in. I'm going to walk you through exactly what you need to do to be prepared for the primary election. So we're not going to really talk about who are you voting for at this. I mean, we can talk about issues and stuff, but this is like, hey, if you don't want to get a mail-in ballot, I need to show you where to go by the 15th of April to say online, don't send me a mail-in ballot. Or we have a closed primary here. People don't understand what a closed primary is. So if you want to vote in our DA race, you're going to need to be affiliated Republican or Democrat, because if you're a nonpartisan, you're shut out. And then we have to have a talk about open primaries and why we don't have that. But that's all just process stuff.
Right. Now, do you find that as you help people get more civically minded, even on more personal related things, do you find that opens people up to be more interested in politics in general?
Oh yeah. Because like you say, okay, let's say you're trying to do a small business. And I'm like, okay, Mike, first you got to go to the Secretary of State. Then you got to go to your county commission, and you might actually have to go to the city council. And then you're going to get all red in the face and go, what the heck? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I'm like, you know what? All those people are elected. Would you like me to show you when they run for reelection and how you vote for those people, because you probably are going to want to know that.
I love that. I mean, it's nothing like running your head into the bureaucracy to make you
Yeah.
realize that your voice is actually really important in the elections.
Exactly. Or ballot questions where people get frustrated and they're like, the legislature won't change this thing. Is there another way? I'm like, yes, we can do ballot initiatives in Nevada. And so I've run Zoom meetings on just how does that work? Let's say you want to change something. Let's say you want to do open primary or ranked choice voting, which I'm supporting a ballot question to do those things. But
Great.
how do you even do a ballot question? So I've run workshops on that too.
That's fantastic. We also are involved in things like ranked choice voting or Final Five type voting
Yep, that's what we're
initiatives.
supporting. Yep.
That's great. Love that. But it's interesting because people we talk a lot about who doesn't vote, and there's a sense that people who don't vote because they just don't care. But oftentimes we find that people don't vote because they feel locked out.
They're
And
frustrated.
yeah, the systems either don't make sense to them or they don't know where to go, what to do to be a part of it. And I think to your point about being privileged to kind of know the civic side of this is, it can be easy to sit back and say, well, it's not that hard to figure out how to register to vote, but it can be. And then to figure out what elections you even vote in when elections are even coming up is
right.
a whole new obstacle.
Right. And every state's different. I mean, and that adds a whole nother layer is people don't realize every state runs its own election processes. So people and where I'm at in Las Vegas, very transient place. People are moving in and out all the time. And so it's at the point where people start to realize, wait, you guys do things differently here. That's when I start getting emails and phone calls. And it's kind of what the heck? I don't understand this thing. Why this isn't the way I'm used to doing it. Then we get to talk about why state runs its own election processes and how every time you move, you have to change things. And so then people say to me, oh, okay, then I have no idea what I'm doing. So I need your help.
Well, so that kind of brings up a subject I wanted to ask you about, and that is there's this myth that I think it's a myth. I'm curious your opinion. I shouldn't bias the question from the start. There's this idea that we hear all the time that non-voters or low information voters are predominantly Democrats, and so this causes a lot of Republicans to spend a lot of time thinking, how do I make it harder to vote? How do I reduce vote total? And they won't say that out loud, obviously, but these impositions that they put towards voting are often designed to minimize who votes under this theory that there's a partisan advantage for Democrats. And I think a lot of Democrats similarly want to facilitate voting because they also believe this kind of idea. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that, if that's been your experience.
I think there might be a kernel, a grain of truth to that. But what I find is I never use the word apathy. I don't find people are apathetic. I find they are frustrated. And so sometimes they don't realize that the process that they're frustrated with is that process they could impact through voting. As soon as I connect the two together for them, these are elected people who are running these processes. The eyes light up and they're like, how do I register to vote? When's the election? It has to have meaning in their life. So the people who aren't voting, they're not seeing the connection between the things they're frustrated with and people who are elected to office that they could vote somebody else in or they could talk to. As soon as they start seeing, no, wait, there's a connection here between who you vote for or how you vote and you being able to start a small business or you being able to get a better education system. As soon as they realize that, boy, they want to know, when are we doing forums and how come we're not doing this? And they're engaged. So I have to say to my Republican friends, I find people who are very conservative who are like, I don't know what I'm doing, help me. But I say to my Democratic friends, they're not just going to vote. You have to talk to them and talk about civics, not just do hair on fire or whatever, abortion or guns or whatever. People tune that out right now. Say, hey, you know how you're really frustrated with your kid's school? If you vote for the school board, those are the people who make that decision. And here's how they do it. Then they're going to vote. They're not just going to vote because you're going to send them a paper ballot in the mail just because you make it easier to vote. It has to have meaning for them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly right. I'm a long time political campaign operative here, but
Mhm.
we always say that the cliche is that all politics is local,
Yep.
but still you see people running essentially national issue campaigns
Did
for
you see me roll
everything.
my eyes? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's always been a frustration for me because the thing that will impact your life more than who is president is who's your mayor or who's
Yes.
your city council.
Right now, school boards. Everybody's aware of
School.
all the stuff happening with the school boards.
Mhm.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So, how do you think or do you have any ideas on how we can reorient people's thinking? Because people, in my experience, seem to expect, Congress or the president to address all of their problems when they've got a much easier path to affecting their own lives at the local level. And that's kind of borne out. I actually went through and pulled some of Nevada. Nevada? Yeah, I did.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. You
Well, I
got it.
was second guessing myself. I pulled some of Nevada's voter turnout rates for the last four federal elections. So in 2020, it was 78%, in 18, 62, in 16, 77-ish%, and in 14, 45%. So,
Yeah, 14 is the infamous election cycle here.
oh, is it notorious?
Yes. No, when I talk to political organizers, they're like, "Oh no, is it going to be another 2014? Oh my
Mm,
gosh, we can't let that happen." That was a bad election
yeah.
cycle.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and these patterns I think are mirrored probably in every state if you looked them up. One, to see the growth in voter participation, which is always good to see,
But you
but
do the presidential,
presidential,
midterm, presidential, midterm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then and I don't know what it's like in Nevada, but if they have, I live in Virginia, we have off-term elections for governor and for other things,
We
and those are
used to.
even lower turnout.
And we actually 2 legislative sessions ago, because I testified on this, got rid of those and moved everything over to the federal election cycle. Because, for instance, the city of Las Vegas, they considered a high turnout to be 11%. It was bad. And so they had some elections where people were getting elected with like 7% turnout.
Wow.
And I'm like, to me, that looks like voter suppression. It's
Yeah.
just that people are not aware of elections happening or they don't know how it impacts their life. But we moved that. So this is going to be the first election cycle where everything, mayors, city councils, everything's on the same race or on the same ballot.
Well, that's great. I mean, thank you for doing that.
Yes.
Not a resident, but I still appreciate that because that when it comes to really kind of fulfilling the promise of democracy, as it were, the more people that turn out, the better results you tend to get,
Yep.
or at least the more kind of true to the local population. And so, so I'm just wondering if you have that. I mean, that's a great way for states who aren't doing it already to increase participation in their local and statewide elections. But I wonder if you have any other thoughts about how organizations like yours and others around the country can actually try and close that gap between presidential or congressional and local.
So in Nevada, on our midterms, that's when we elect our governor, our secretary of state, our constitutional office, because we elect a lot of people, our attorney general. So those tend to get almost the same level of press coverage. So that's a little bit of an advantage that we have, that at least you've got like the gubernatorial, U.S. Senate, those types of things. But what I do, and this, like in midterms, which is what we're doing right now, I really kind of try and watch what everybody's yelling about on Twitter and everybody's riled up about. And then I run meetings on those things and say, hey, Mike, I noticed that you were with that group that was at the school board meeting, or you were at the county commission talking about redistricting. Did you know that the people who are in charge of that stuff are up for election? Let's do a Zoom meeting, kind of talk about jurisdictions, talk about how you can be more engaged. And then I tell folks, think of campaigning season, election season, as the best time to lobby people, the best time to do advocacy, because that's when they're going to stand right in front of you, or they're going to be on a Zoom and they really are engaged because they want your vote. And that's when you say, okay, earn it, because here's what I want. Because once they go off to Washington or off to the Capitol, then you're just dealing with their staff and they're super busy. But now is the time, say, okay, if you get elected, I want you to remember me because I'm really big on mental health and you're going to be hearing from me. That's the time to do advocacy. And I have found, now that I'm doing like advocacy during the interim, advocacy during election, I get a lot of people who are like, I never thought of this way. I need to be a registered voter so I can say I'm a constituent, huh? Yes. Yes, you should.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's finding those connections for people. Like you said, it's that personal.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's great. It's, we try to, you know, we try to increase participation as much as we can, as many places. And one thing that um, one thing that we do as an organization, I'm curious to hear how it is in Nevada, but we track the rise of radicalism in politics right
Mhm,
now. We have a
mhm.
project where we're actually building out a capability to track federal candidates and some statewide offices who build their candidacies usually off of lies to undermine not just democracy but sometimes government itself,
Mm.
and conspiracy theories. Um, so uh, it's interesting trying to get people in trying to get people engaged, while there's also this kind of radicalism that's rising, that's trying to uh, either sell them a big lie or to discourage people from even participating or in thinking that the government is doing some crazy things. I'm
Right.
just curious, a neighbor state, Arizona, had obviously has a large issue with that. Nevada is a purple state, although
Purple.
people who are relatively new to presidential elections have seen it go blue for 4 consecutive cycles. But it used to be a pretty solidly Republican, not solidly, but used to be a Republican state, Republican governors, Republican president. So, as a purple state, does that have any moderating effect, or do you think that that kind of plague in our politics is just ubiquitous?
So, one of the reasons I'm supporting the open primary, the final five, is because of extremism that we're starting to see more and more. And it's interesting because our Secretary of State, Barbara Sagafsky, is a Republican. And so she was the one that was saying there was no fraud, election processes were good. I can vouch for this. And so she got death threats and stuff. And so
Mm.
we've got kind of weird dynamics that happen in this state. But we have a Republican Party at the state level that's embraced the Proud Boys. But then I even say on the Democratic side, I say to my Democratic friends, I need you to be honest about what you are going to do. Don't just do the bell whistle type stuff and, oh, abortion or, oh, this thing, and not really have really thoughtful discussions about what you plan to do and whether you're going to be able to do it. Because when you say we're going to give you everything and the moon, and then you run into the buzzsaw that is Congress or a legislative session and you can't do it, people are going to say you lied to them. And so I say to my Democratic friends, you need to be so on the mark when it comes to being straightforward, honest, that you're impacting how people are interpreting politics when you say you can do things and then you can't. So I agree with you, but we're one of those states where our nonpartisan minor party registration is 37%. And I think Virginia is starting, your non-affiliated registration
Mhm.
is ticking up too. I think North Carolina is too,
Right.
where you're just having people go, I am done with both the political parties. I want to be civically engaged and vote and stuff, but I don't trust either of you right now. So, a pox on y'all house. I'm out. And so I'm glad that there's at least registering to vote. That means they still want to be engaged, but they do not want to be involved with the parties.
Right. I mean, that's critically important that people are still involved in politics, because there is, I think, another problem that we're seeing, which is being so frustrated with the system or so disillusioned with it that people just withdraw entirely.
Yes.
And alongside of that is an issue that we confront a lot of times, which is people losing faith in the very concept of democracy itself.
Yep.
And sometimes that's fueled by conspiracy theories, but sometimes that's fueled, to your point, about just being promised things and then feeling like a democratic system can never actually deliver any of those solutions.
Right.
What do you say to people? How do you confront people when they say it's not worth it, nothing works, maybe it would just be better if we could just enact the rules we want and be done with it?
Right. So it's interesting when people have discussions about like voter suppression. Because Nevada actually has many, many different ways. You can register to vote online. We're going to do mail-in ballots. I mean, we don't have a voter suppression problem. But I always look at that group of people who could easily register to vote right now with their cell phone and say no. And we don't talk about them. The group that you just talked about, who finally just checked out and said, I can't take it anymore. I worry about them because we're not doing anything for them. Those are the folks that when I engage with them, it's usually in how do I change the process? How do I change the system? So they'll engage on ballot questions. like we're going to do open primary. All of a sudden they're popping up on my meetings. They're like, wait, what are you doing? Because this is one of the reasons why I checked out. Or, we talk about automatic voter registration or the Equal Rights Amendment, or things that can't get through the buzzsaw, can't get through processes as they are. People get frustrated. Because we're lucky that I live in a state that allows for ballot initiatives, I can say, let's just have a conversation about how you and I, we the people, can change the process. And then maybe you'll have more faith in actually engaging. That's where I usually pick up those folks that have just checked out. It's usually in ballot initiatives.
That's great. For people who are watching who might not have much experience in this, every state has different rules for ballot initiatives, and some, make them almost functionally impossible. Some give the
Right.
state legislature or the governor essentially a veto power
Veto.
over them.
Yeah.
And a lot of, I think, democracy reform initiatives have just run into a buzzsaw, whether it's gerrymandering reform,
Yep.
non-partial redistricting, or final five voting or ranked choice voting. They've found successes in places where the state constitution usually is written in a way to allow those kinds of ballot initiatives. Yep. And then once they're on the ballot, they turn out to be incredibly popular.
Yes, which is why we get sued all the time by both of the political parties, because I did the redistricting ballot question last time when we got sued by the Democrats. And we're doing the open primary, and it's the Democrats that are suing us again. So people, when they say to me, "Are you really nonpartisan?" I'm like, "Yeah, both sides hates me. I've been sued by both sides."
It's a badge of honor. I like to tell people, both parties have a vested interest in keeping the system the way it is.
And that's what it is.
Yeah, even if they're broadly more open to some kinds of reforms you might like, in the end, if it means that they have a third opponent on the ballot, or that their district goes from a +5 to a toss-up, they have a vested interest in not doing that.
They're not happy. They're not happy. But I think that, because as a historian, what I can tell you is, when you look at the fight for democracy in this country, it wasn't when we wrote the U.S. Constitution. It was when we started adding amendments. So when you look, voting rights are not in the body of the Constitution. Anything related to democracy that's not related to the 3 federal branches isn't in the federal Constitution. So instead, they've provided 2 ways for us to do reform. One, amend the U.S. Constitution, which is really kind of hard to do, but then also kicking a bunch of things down to the states and let us kind of duke it out at the state level. But where we've gotten to the point where we couldn't fix things at the state level, that people were just being blocked too much, that's when you see these flurries of amendments added to the Constitution. The first flurry was the Bill of Rights, where you had people who said, "I'm not ratifying that thing until I see protections." There was an agreement. They added the Bill of Rights. But then you see like the Civil War amendments. Then you see the progressive amendments. Then you see the civil rights amendments, where when we make big change, where we've just fought it out at the state level and couldn't get the change that we needed, then everybody came together and said, okay, what do we need to do at the federal level? And you usually see 2, 3, maybe 4 amendments to really kind of shift us back and say, no, we still need to be on this reform path. I would like to be able to see something added to the federal Constitution that gives every state, we the people in every state, to do ballot initiatives.
That's interesting. I'd actually not heard that proposal before, but that's that would be that'd be kind of a cool amendment. As a politics nerd, I've always kind of wanted to see, as an adult, the actual amendment process happen, because it hasn't happened. And
it's been a while. We're ready for some.
Yeah.
Right.
But I'd never thought about basically enshrining an amendment process into an amendment, which is functionally what you're talking about.
Because you can do Article 5 convention. So there is parts of the Constitution that does do that kicks it down to the state level. So when you're amending the U.S. Constitution, it can either start it with Congress and then it comes down to the states, or it can bubble up through what's called Article 5 conventions and go this way. So you're already enabling kind of people to take amending into their own hands under Article 5. Could you just empower people at the state level to do ballot questions, and let us duke it out at the state level to decide whether we want to do some of these things or not? Don't cut people off at the knees.
Yeah, that's an intriguing idea, and it's what I always find interesting. My background is I have been a Republican, and now it's complicated, but the Republican argument was always exactly what you're talking about. Let the states manage these things. Laboratories of democracy will figure it out. And it always felt like the Democratic Party was going the opposite direction. We need centralized hand
Right.
down of policy. But now it's just kind of everyone's kind of going in this centralized system. But what you're talking about would be a great way to enshrine the ability to really empower the states, which ought to appeal to a Republican audience. And then the fact that it would open the door to a lot of, especially pro-democracy reforms, ought to appeal to a Democratic audience.
Right.
So really, they ought to be together on something like that. But I mean, it would be interesting to see if you could build a coalition behind that, because
I mean, it's different messaging for sure. Because with my Republican friends, I'm like, well, states' rights, right?
Right.
Right. Okay. And then with my Democratic friends, I'm like, yeah, but aren't you here in Nevada? Aren't you running 3 ballot initiatives right now? Because I'm pretty sure you are. So you support it here. Why don't you support it for Missouri, or support it for Kansas? And so it's figuring out what they say and what they do, and saying, yeah, is there a discrepancy between what you're saying and what you're doing? Because I'm about to call it out publicly.
Yeah.
Even on a recorded Zoom meeting, and then people will share it. Just saying.
Absolutely. Well, it's one of the more, I think, frustrating things about I would say our modern politics, but I feel like there's always been at least some of this in the history of American politics, but is the kind of a shamelessness about switching your position when it is most beneficial to you to do so.
Right. And then both sides are like, well, sure, we're this is what you do. We want to stay in power. You want to get things done. Of course, we're going to lie to you. I'm like, yeah, but then this is when my students don't want to vote for you.
Right.
Right. This is why they're coming to me all frustrated.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, jumping gears a little bit, because, you mentioned your students, and I'm just curious. One thing we talk about a lot is engaging younger voters and making sure that people are coming up to be engaged. And I mean, we've seen, I think, Gen Z be actually very engaged in a lot of social political issues, but then, at the ballot box, not necessarily being the force that they potentially could be. And one reason I think that's often cited for that is general just disillusionment with politics. And I'm curious, if that's been your experience with some of your younger students, or if there's another dynamic at play.
No, I mean, I think you're circling right around it. My students tend to know how they feel about issues. So you can ask them about student debt. You can ask them about green energy. You can ask them about voting rights. They'll be able to do the research. They know exactly how they feel about that. If you ask them what party they're affiliated with, they don't know. They don't care. And so identifying and affiliating with the party is not a thing for them. They just want the issues that they're interested. They want somebody to address those issues. And so this is where they get disillusioned, because one of the parties will say, oh yeah, we support that issue. That thing that's really important to you is part of our platform. So register with us, vote for our candidates. We're going to get that thing done. And then, bringing up student debt. Did you get that thing done? No. So why should I trust your party? And then they're saying to me, is there another way I can work on this issue without having to affiliate with the party? And so, ballot questions one, but in the state of Nevada, people can run as a nonpartisan. You need 250 signatures on a petition, which is not hard to get. Yeah. And we give you ballot access to the general election. There's no primary for nonpartisans. You go to the general election. So I tell them, do you want to run? I mean, I can show you how to fill out the paperwork if you want to run for office. You be the person. Get out there and get other people that agree with you, and you run for office. And we actually have more nonpartisans running this time, I think, for that reason. They want to run on issues. They don't want to deal with the party drama.
Mm-hmm. Well, and obviously that goes great with Final Five or ranked choice voting as
Exactly.
well. It's a better opportunity, because even the long in the tooth of us in politics, have this deeply founded belief that you just can't win without a party apparatus, party machine around you, because unfortunately, so often it's proven true.
But you talk to Gen Z. I mean, you can talk to some of my millennial Gen Z students who have like 5,000 TikTok followers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So they've already got outreach with a free platform. And so for them, I think they can work around some of this stuff to do free.
Yeah. I mean, there are more ways now to reach people than ever before for independent or nonpartisan candidates. So it's the tools
Exactly.
are out there.
Exactly.
I don't know how to use them, but
they're very
the TikToks.
good at it. They're very good at it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we're going to come to a close. I have a couple more questions for you.
Okay.
One of the big ones is just for our viewers, anyone who's listened about what you're doing in Nevada. What advice do you have for them? How can they be involved in this, and what lessons have you learned that might help other states?
So, this is the thing I think we benefited the most from in the pandemic is everybody's on Zoom meetings now, and you meet people in other states, and you start talking about what are you doing? How are you handling that? And so I've been asked that question. It's like, well, how do I replicate what you're doing? I said, you don't have to know every single process. If you have been through legislative sessions, so you know how the bill process works, or you've done ballot questions, go on a Zoom meeting. Oh, excuse me. Go on a Zoom meeting and teach people. I'm sorry, I'm having dry mouth.
No.
Okay. So I tell them, if you've done a process, just teach someone else that process. So it doesn't have, and then if somebody says to you, well, how do I do this other thing? Look it up. Go to somebody else. Have them as a guest speaker. Write a guide where you're having people that you've done a ballot question. I've done a legislative process. I've worked on a campaign. We all three do a panel on Zoom and we answer questions. And then we write up a guide and put it as a PDF online. So now Mike knows how to do those things. So you don't need to be a professor, because sometimes people will say, well, you're a professor. No, I mean, obviously you're going to be able to do this. But I work with people like you who've been in the political circles for a long time. And this is what you do when you file for office. This is who you talk to. This is where you set up your bank account. This is how you do your email address. There you go. You could do what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's important because also it's changing constantly. So,
right.
You have to keep up with what's happening. But I think that's great advice for people. The last thing I want to ask you is to be an ambassador for your state. For those of us who have never been, or like me, who have only been to Las Vegas for the bright lights, what's the best thing about Nevada? Why should we go to Nevada outside of Las Vegas?
Oh, come to Nevada and go to our outdoor spaces. So if you fly into Las Vegas, and you can spend some time on the Strip, because we would love for you to leave some of your money here. You can easily go to Red Rock. You can go out to the lake. In the wintertime, you can go skiing at Mount Charleston. There's an app you can put on your phone. It's called Neon to Nature. It shows all of the paths and the little hiking and walking and biking that's inside the city. You can get on a plane and go up to Tahoe, and that's like a 30-minute plane ride if you want to go up to Reno and back. The Great Basin has a lot of beautiful spaces.
Excellent. So Nevada, come for the beautiful landscapes.
And leave some money here.
Leave some money here and stay for the political reform and burgeoning civil education.
But I'm sure you've probably heard we're going to host the Super Bowl here in 24. We've got the Golden Knights. We've got a hockey team that's been to the Stanley Cup. We're all about sports now too.
Yeah. Well, as a Caps fan, sorry about that Stanley Cup, but not that sorry.
No, I mean, it was like in one of our first times we were having a hockey team. I'm like, okay, this is cool. We don't care if we lose. This was fun.
Yeah, and I liked the Las Vegas style shows before every game. It was fun.
It was hilarious to watch people on Twitter when we would do those shows, and the regular hockey fans are like, "What is this? You guys are ruining things." We're like, "It's Vegas. This is what we do. This is what people expect."
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Cosgrove, thank you for joining us, and thank you for telling us about Vote Nevada and all the important work that you're doing. I hope it's been informative for all of our viewers, and I hope inspiring a little bit too, that you can make some big differences in your state or in your community, just helping people navigate their interface with government, and hopefully just encourage people to be more involved and participate even further in our democracy. Thank you again.
Well, thank you for having me.
We appreciate it. And of course, if you liked this interview, feel free to go back through and watch all the rest of our RAM chats. You can find them on our YouTube page. Subscribe to our YouTube page. Follow us on Twitter at Renew America, and keep in touch and keep in tune for more events and more conversations like this to come in the future. Thank you again.